All right, welcome everyone to this October community call on persistent identifiers for humanities, arts, and social sciences. So we're going to start with some introductions. You'll see here the ORCID US community staff, Sheila Rabin, the senior strategist for the research infrastructure programs, Paolo Gahilde, the strategist for the ORCID US community, and myself, Kayla Ramhit, the program assistant for the ORCID US community. And then we'll also hosted alongside our ORCID CA staff from Canadian Research Knowledge Networks, or CRKN, John Aspler, the manager of the Canadian Persistent Identifier Community, and Ursula Carmichael, Canadian Persistent Identifier Community Officer. So I'm going to go over our agenda for today. We're going to go over the current landscape of PIDs in humanities, arts, and social sciences. Then we'll talk about some benefits in those disciplines by using PIDs in publishing, funding, and reporting. And then we also have some case studies from our Knowledge Commons, the Canadian HSS Commons, and the American Council of Learned Societies. Our guest speakers will speak to you today as well. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and discussion. So I will hand things over to Ursula to talk about the current landscape.
Great, thank you so much, Kayla. So PIDs, or persistent identifiers, are gaining traction in the humanities, arts, and social sciences, or HSS, to improve discovery, accessibility, and reuse of scholarly and creative work. So originally, PIDs have been more common in STEM fields, but PIDs and HSS are increasingly recognized for their role in enhancing research visibility, ensuring attribution, and linking interdisciplinary data. Next slide, please, Kayla. So I'll just take a quick look at some of the most common PIDs that you'll find in HSS fields. So of course you have DOIs. So these are these PIDs uniquely identify outputs such as journal articles, books, data sets. There are ORCID IDs, which are typically described as PIDs for people, or in this case, often researchers. And ORCID IDs can provide centralized research profiles, often integrated into grant and publisher systems. There are also ISNIs, which are used to identify individuals and organizations involved in creative activities. So this could be particularly relevant for humanities and arts, social sciences, because they can distinguish creators with similar names and they support various forms of authorship, from books to exhibitions. They can also be used for pseudonyms, stage names, etc. And then finally, we have ARKs, archival resource keys, which are identifiers often used by libraries and museums for cultural heritage items. So these PIDs really support unique and persistent identification of items in the collections of GLAM institutions. Next slide, please, Kayla. All right, so the adoption of PIDs in HSS does come with some unique challenges, often due to limited funding and resources, as well as the diversity and complexity of research outputs and collaborative practices in these fields. So PIDs, which have historically maybe been more aligned with some STEM disciplines, always capture the full range of HSS research needs. So I'll just go through here a few challenges that we see facing PID adoption in the humanities, arts, and social sciences disciplines. So first off, funding and awareness. So PIDs often come with financial costs that some smaller HSS departments or underfunded HSS departments, smaller cultural institutions, or independent researchers may struggle to meet. So these costs could include like staff and technology. This is probably the most significant barrier to PID adoption in HSS fields, but there's also awareness of PID benefits is sometimes lower in HSS disciplines, and researchers may not be familiar with best practices for using PIDs or the potential advantage for visibility and discoverability. Moving on maybe to diverse outputs. So HSS outputs can vary widely from performances to digital projects to more traditional publications, which makes PID assignment a bit more complicated. Also, authorship in HSS fields may include contributors without traditional academic affiliations, which can make assigning credit more challenging. In terms of integration with existing systems, compared to STEM fields, PIDs like ORCID and DOIs are, in some cases, in certain instances, less integrated into HSS-specific tools, and smaller publishers may lack the infrastructure to assign PIDs systematically. And then finally, in fields like anthropology, history, and Indigenous studies, These fields may require sensitive cultural naming and knowledge attribution practices. So many identifiers commonly used in the research ecosystem may not have that degree of flexibility or understanding embedded in the technology, which may require, in some instances, custom solutions. Next slide, please. So despite the challenges for adoption, PIDs do offer many exciting opportunities in HSS fields, particularly for enhancing visibility, collaboration, and supporting the persistence of HSS research. So PIDs can ensure that HSS outputs, such as monographs or exhibitions, are more accessible and visible, and can help to disambiguate researchers involved in these projects to ensure credit is attributed appropriately. Some PIDs also facilitate metrics that capture broader impacts like public engagement, which can be essential for tracking the reach or interest in HSS outputs, which may be shared in different digital contexts. My colleagues John and Sheila will discuss in greater detail the way that ORCID works to support the visibility of HSS publications and can be integrated into HSS funding workflows and reporting workflows. PIDs assigned to unique HSS materials support persistent access to items, documentation, documents, artwork, etc., that might otherwise be lost. And of course, the use of PIDs in HSS fields also aligns with and advances the FAIR principles. And finally, PIDs can support the linking of HSS data across research networks, helping to form connections that represent complex relationships in history, culture, and society, and even beyond HSS fields. Next slide, please. And I'll finally just highlight here quickly two notable projects that illustrate how PIDs can support HSS research in really innovative ways. So the first is a project called SNAC, or Social Networks and Archival Context. This is developed by the US National Archives, and SNAC helps users find historical information and relationships among people and organizations. And then there's the Links project, which is based in Canada. So the Links project enables researchers to interlink and contextualize online cultural data, which supports scholarly and public engagement. And you'll find links to explore these projects further in these slides, and I would really encourage you to take a look at these projects and their use of PIDs. And now I'll hand it over to John and Sheila to discuss PIDs in HSS publishing and funding workflows.
Thank you very much, Ursula. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be focusing specifically on publishing and research outputs before handing it over to Sheila to speak to funders and other related items. And I guess I really want to start with the idea that there are already plenty of traditional publishing spaces in which arts, humanities, and social science scholars are publishing work. These are, of course, traditional journals, but maybe one thing that's worth highlighting here is that there are particular spaces that I think we are often more likely to find those kinds of journals, and this includes the Open Journal Systems, OJS, platform. In Canada especially, the vast majority of our academic libraries host journals, and many of them, certainly not all of them, but many of them are arts, humanities, and social science journals. They are the Canadian Journal of X at a particular institution. And I don't know if this is mimicked in the American ecosystem, because of course there are, big five publications that are social science, arts, and humanities. But I really want to highlight the open source platform, partly because it often aligns with the values of arts, humanities, and social science scholars and their communities, but also because there's a fantastic set of PID integrations in this system. This is an example of an article that I wrote that I like to highlight. It's in a journal about social justice, so it is a humanities, social science oriented journal. The landing page for this article includes the ORCID IDs for myself and my co-authors, and this is all done through the ORCID integration in OJS. We are able to connect our ORCID IDs, have them appear on the landing page, and next slide, please. We are also then able to have the work metadata pushed back to our ORCID record. So there's an opportunity here to ensure that at the very least, sort of traditional publications in HSSA fields are, and in their journals, are credited in ORCID, not just with a manual entry, which is one of the real challenges that comes up when you're doing this kind of work. In a manual entry, you don't get the green check mark. It takes you more time than it would to just automatically pull the stuff into your ORCID record. So yeah, this is a traditional publication, but at the very least, I think it's worth highlighting that there are lots of opportunities to get that credit added to ORCID. Next slide, please. So another thing I want to highlight is that, again, from the same article, it has a DOI. So we're not just talking about ORCID IDs as PIDs aside to HSSA outputs, but it's also, sorry, HSSA scholars, but it's worth highlighting that in OJS and also in every major publication, there are DOIs that are assigned by the journal or by the publisher. So it's not just ORCID. The DOI is part of this too. And next slide, please. So also it's worth highlighting that it's all of the different PIDs. They're connected more or less effectively. And in this case with ROAR, I wouldn't say that the vast majority of publishers, especially sort of the for-profit ones, have a ROAR connection or plugin. ROAR is the Research Organization Registry identifier it's a PID for organizations. So OJS as an open source platform, it's got the DOIs, it's got ORCID, it's got ROAR, and slowly but surely we're more effectively connecting all of this metadata together to ensure all of the value and benefits of PIDs are granted to journals on this platform, which again, I do think it's worth highlighting. Many of them are HSSA outputs, journals. Next slide, please. So I want to take a moment to move away from traditional publishing to talk about other kinds of research outputs. Another place where PIDs can be assigned to different HSSA outputs and scholars is in your institutional repository. There are all kinds of materials that go into there, and increasingly repositories are starting to register DOIs. And again, just to highlight this in the Canadian context, as we all move towards the shared Scalaris platform where everyone will be using DSpace, there is a data site, there is a Crossref plugin for DSpace. You can register DOIs for the materials that are deposited there. There is an ORCID connection that exists that we've been working on together, the US, Canada, and a number of other countries around the world. This is a really important kind of way to get PIDs for non-traditional research outputs, as these repositories potentially contain things like dissertations. Sorry, I shouldn't say dissertations. That is not a non-traditional, but things like educational resources, information about, your music compositions and your exhibitions. The ways that those are deposited in repositories increasingly is something that can then be assigned to DOI and added to your ORCID record. Next slide, please. I want to highlight a few specific ORCID integrations that exist in databases that are more for HSSA scholars than for STEM scholars. One good example of this is the HeinOnline integration. This is, of course, traditionally a legal scholarly database, although it is more than that at this point. And this is a screen cap that I grabbed off of a blog post they have highlighting how the tool works. That's the link at the bottom of the page there on the right. And as you can see, you can use your profile on HeinOnline to connect to ORCID, push stuff from HeinOnline into your ORCID record so that it makes it easier for you, so you're not manually entering things, so you get the credit with the green check mark and everything, and to pull things back from ORCID into your HeinOnline profile, even if the text is not stored in HeinOnline. Next slide. And this is my last one. Instead of starting from an outside system and pushing things into ORCID, another way that you can easily or more easily fill and flesh out your ORCID record is by using something called a search and link wizard from inside ORCID. You go to your ORCID record, you click the Add Works button, and then you can choose a whole bunch of different ways via DOI, via manual entry. One of them is called search and link, and a few of those are humanities-oriented systems. So this is the one I wanted to share. It's the Modern Language Association bibliography. This is what happens the moment after I click on the MLA search and link wizard. It brings me to an external page where I can start searching the database for my work, connecting my ORCID, and pulling things back into my ORCID record. So while this is an ORCID-specific tool, again, where there are, maybe not an MLA specifically, but where there are DOIs, where there's metadata around your work that connect PIDs together, scholars in the humanities, social science, and arts can really start to take advantage of those tools. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, sorry. I have one last thing to say. Apologies. Ursula has already highlighted this blog post, or at least the fact that ORCID is doing this work to expand its work type vocabulary. I just wanted to include this screen cap to specifically highlight in the highlights box. This is one of the main justifications. Many work types that are important in humanities and arts disciplines are currently not well represented in ORCID registry, so ORCID is not as useful as it might be to researchers in those fields, but ORCID is committed to making that work better. All right, now over to you, Sheila.
Great. Okay, so when it comes to funding and ORCID in particular, funders that are giving out funding for humanities, social sciences, and arts, researchers and scholars can essentially use the same processes as funders like NIH and others that are more traditionally science focused are already doing with ORCID. So really for funding in ORCID in particular, it's really just a matter of making those humanities, arts, and social sciences funders aware of ORCID and what the benefits are. So just as with any kind of funder, funders in these disciplines can allow users to sign into application systems using ORCID, ask for, or better yet, require ORCID IDs from researchers and scholars that are applying for funding. On the next slide, we can see that, similar to many people are familiar with Science CV, and how researchers and funding applicants can import data from their ORCID record to fill out funding applications. Funders for these other disciplines can also do that same thing. So essentially here, we're just reiterating that funders of all types, no matter what kind of research they're funding, can use ORCID to their benefit in their funding workflows. On the next slide, just continuing with this thought, again, funders of all kinds can write funding information to their awardees' ORCID records. So this is possible. It's just a matter of making those funders aware and encouraging them to become ORCID members and take action to use the ORCID API in this way. And then on the next slide, I think this wraps up the funding and ORCID section. Funders, again, of all disciplines can read data from ORCID records to keep up with where researchers have gone and what they've gone on to do, to help get that idea of return on investment. And this also would allow researchers in these disciplines to save time and reduce administrative burden by using their ORCID record to share information with the funders they're working with. One more point on the next slide related to funding. I just wanted to highlight, since this call is about persistent identifiers more generally, not just ORCID, although ORCID is a big focus for all of us. I wanted to bring up the concept of grant DOIs. So again, we're starting to see funders, typically more in the medical and health sciences and more hard sciences, starting to use grant DOIs. So assigning DOIs to grant awards. And these are specific DOIs for grants. Right now, many funders are doing this through Crossref, and DataCite is making this available. But essentially, if a funder can assign a grant DOI to each grant award that they give out, that DOI is going to have metadata behind it where the funder can include the researcher's ORCID IDs, the employer's ROR IDs, and then grant DOIs can be included in ORCID funding entries, as you're seeing with the screenshot here. This is an example from American Heart Association, where they have a grant DOI included in the ORCID funding entry. So that's kind of another aspect of PIDs that can be helpful for funding in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, but also all disciplines. And then next, another kind of facet, it could be considered funding, but if you're dealing with something that's not necessarily funding, maybe it's giving out awards to researchers in humanities, arts, and social sciences, or even scholarships, those can be considered distinctions, which can be written to researchers' ORCID records using the ORCID affiliation manager. So that's one potential way that many organizations represented on this call can start to think about researchers in the humanities, arts, and social sciences in particular, and thinking, do you have any awards that you're giving out or anything else that could be considered a distinction? If so, you can use the ORCID affiliation manager to add those to ORCID records. And then last but not least, on the next slide, when it comes to reporting and PIDs in general, I'm going to first speak about ORCID, and again, it's the same concept. Organizations that are asking researchers, regardless of what discipline they're in, to report on their activities and what they've published that year, or what they've done that year. You can use the ORCID API to allow people to import data from their ORCID record to fill out their reports. And that's all dependent on what kind of software systems you're using and whether you have the capacity to do a custom ORCID API integration. But all of the same things that you can do with other disciplines, you can do with arts, humanities, and social sciences. Again, it's just a matter of that awareness. So organizations can use the ORCID Affiliation Manager to write information to people's ORCID records. You can allow your researchers to import data from their ORCID record when they're having to fill out forms, or you can go and pull that data from their ORCID record if you have an ORCID integration. And then, of course, you know, all of this, being able to import data from your ORCID record kind of depends on having data in your ORCID record to begin with. So that's where this bulleted list on the left comes into play. Things that organizations can do in general to help researchers make sure their ORCID records are populated so that those researchers can in turn use their ORCID record for reporting purposes. All right, next slide. All right, so now we're ready to get into the case studies. First up, we're going to hear from Scott and Knowledge Commons, followed by Canadian HSS Commons, and then American Council of Learned Societies. So Scott, you're up first if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen.
All right, thank you, Sheila. Let's see, here we go. All right, so get this all set. You can all see my screen now, I assume.
Yes.
Okay, great. We're asked to keep this to about 8 minutes, so I will go fairly quickly. But you can find these slides when Sheila shares the information out, and I'll also link it on my website. So a little bit about me. I'm Scott Shupri. I'm Assistant Dean for Academic Technology and Scholarly Engagement at the MSU College of Arts and Letters. And I'm also Interim Director of Mesh Research, which is a center focused on building applications and supporting and connecting applications for supporting digital scholarly work and practice. And Knowledge Commons is one of the core products that we work with. I'll just give you a quick overview. I'll talk a little bit about what is Knowledge Commons for those that might not know, and then contextualizing the work on persistent identifiers that we're doing within some of the broader projects that we're doing right now, including a ORCID Global Participation Fund grant, and then our ongoing development of the platform. So Knowledge Commons is formerly Humanities Commons. It was launched 10 years ago by Modern Language Association as MLA Commons, quickly became Humanities Commons, which you might know it as, and now rebranded in the spring of 2024 to Knowledge Commons due to the kind of broader interest in the platform outside of the arts, humanities, and social sciences. But we do remain a kind of HSS-focused space. We have a large number of member organizations, and MSU is one of those, and is the host of the platform. So you can get to it at hcommons.org. Knowledge Commons brings together a suite of 5 tools, core tools within the ecosystem. Some of which talk with one another a little better than others, but all of which are working on connecting through the use of persistent identifiers like ORCID. And I'll share a little bit of this work. So right now, using ORCID as a connection point for us, Knowledge Commons Works, which is our repository, it's If you're a member and have seen it, you may have seen the soft launch. It's officially launching tomorrow. Our new repository that's based on Invenio RDM. It's fantastic upgrade over the prior work. And one of the biggest ones is that if you have the DataSite connector set up with your ORCID and you enter your ORCID ID, when you make a deposit, you almost immediately see that the record has been added to your ORCID. And once it's there, as Sheila and John talked about, there's a bunch of other spaces where you can connect to. You can see in this diagram, I have the solid lines are the connections that are already made. The dashed lines are connections that we're working on at the moment. And so this really plays into our long-term goal of the platform being a space for scholars to showcase, conduct, and publish their scholarly work and practice. The use of the persistent identifiers is really kind of a foundational piece of that interconnection work. I'm going to move along by this. You can browse it a little bit at your leisure when you get the link to the slides. But we have previously developed an ORCID plugin that works on WordPress. You can put it onto any individual or self-hosted WordPress site that you can do that. It allows you to display your own ORCID information. It uses blocks in the Gutenberg editor, so you can pull it in. It's styles based on the style for your page, so you're looking at something that's fairly nice. And we're working on the next generation of that. That's going to enhance that usability and allow you to display it across our system on any sort of Knowledge Commons sites. So you can get that plugin already from the link here from our GitHub repository if you're interested in it. But like I said, really some of the other exciting things that are happening with this is we have the upgrade to KC Works, which makes use of ORCID within authors. It does mint a DOI, as I suggested, through DataSite, and it also makes use of raw data for institutional affiliation. So you can kind of see that in practice of some of the things that John and Sheila were both talking about within the system. Once you have connected your ORCID to your deposit and you have the DataSite connector set up with ORCID, it literally shows up. I think I made a deposit the other day and it showed up within minutes. I had an email from ORCID letting me know there was an additional record to my page. So works quite fast to get your work into ORCID. The work that we're doing as part of the Global Participation Fund project is also to bring ORCID data into our profile page within the system. So we have ORCID as a method of authentication for logging in already. And we're working on, once you have authenticated, you can be able to start to pull your ORCID data into your KC profiles space so that you're not duplicating data across the systems, but rather being able to use something like ORCID as your primary space for your biography or other demographic information, as well as pulling in your scholarly works. So Sites is the tool that provides our WordPress multi-site hosting. This newer version of the plugin will also allow you then to pull it into any sites that you have on the platform. And we're also working on ways that the new version of the plugin will allow you to have multiple users information displayed on a page. So a research center might be able to use data from the ORCID profiles of all the members of the center. And also working on ways that people can do custom profile sections and items so that you can choose those pieces of your profile that are particularly relevant to that. I have another center that I was co-directing prior to MESH that is completely not in this sort of digital scholarship space. And so my scholarly record looks very different if I'm in that world than when I'm in this world. And so we wanted the ability for folks to be able to do that, as well as the multi-language support that we're working on, so that we're working more broadly than just English. And I know we go to questions and at the end, so I will stop share.
Great, thank you, Scott. All right, Graham, you're up next.
Great, thank you. I'll just share my screen as well here. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, thanks to Sheila and everyone for including me on the little case study panel, and thanks for everyone for being here today. I'll be talking about persistent identifiers and a platform called the Canadian Humanities and Social Sciences, or HSS Commons. And just briefly a little bit about me. My name is Graham Jensen. I'm the Assistant Director and Digital Humanities Research Lead in the Electronic Textual Cultures Lab located in Canada, beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. And just briefly as well, a little bit about my connection to ORCID. As a doctoral student, I quickly discovered, as I was studying literature and other exciting things, that when you Googled, when I Googled my own name, you know, I was trying to establish myself as a literary scholar, carve out a space, get my work out there, and I realized every time I Googled my name, instead I was seeing Graham Jensen from Australia show up, who was not you know, co-lead of research development strategy for the Commons as I am, but an Australian bank robber and career criminal shot and killed by police for robbing a bank. But that time it wasn't actually him robbing a bank. So I quickly learned that, hey, maybe this ORCID thing could be useful for me, that disambiguation piece especially. So yeah, big fan of ORCID. But I'm here to talk about something called the Canadian HSS Commons. So briefly, and in fact, we share many things in common with the Knowledge Commons, who's one of our partners. We're kind of a combination of an academic social networking site where you can build out profiles, but also we have a repository as well where you can publish and share and develop research in different ways. So we're all based on open source software, specifically the Hub Zero platform developed at Purdue, but now located at UC San Diego. And we've customized that in a lot of different ways for the Canadian context. So while you can kind of theoretically set up your own version of our site in your own kind of local context, our instance of this commons is this space for researchers, not just in Canada, but elsewhere, to share information, make connections, build community. Our site is hosted on our national academic research infrastructure. And that's important to us because that allows for different supports, including thanks to Canada's generous legal provisions regarding fair use, and also its laws concerning the protection of data, including researchers' data, profile data, things like that. So having our servers in Canada is important to us and to a lot of people in our community. And we're responsive to those different communities across the humanities and social sciences, knowing that those different communities have different needs, and that plays into what they make of the infrastructure and what their wish list items for it would be. I won't dwell on this for too long, but we are lucky to work with a lot of different partners, including CRKN, represented on this call. So we're grateful to John Aspler and others with CRKN for helping us with our ORCID integrations, among other things. And again, yeah, we've been lucky to work with Kathleen Fitzpatrick and others in the Knowledge Commons community as well. PIDs are important to us for a lot of different reasons. and I would sum it up by saying it's a story of carrots and sticks. In other words, there are intrinsic and extrinsic motivations for turning to PIDs. Some of those are dictated from above. So, for example, in some of the final points here, in Canada, we have Tri-Council open access policy dictating, how publications should be shared. And spoiler alert, the answer is openly as possible. And in this kind of Canadian context, there are a lot of organizations turning to PIDs and looking at ways to make different repositories and systems interoperable, open and accessible in different ways. So besides some of the basic kind of reasons to turn to PIDs, including disambiguation, minting DOIs, and things like that, persistence, preservation of research data. Yeah, our users are also kind of curious about visibility and attribution and things like that as well. One point I will kind of draw your attention to here is the regarding the persistence and preservation of research data. We've done some research into what are called vanishing journals, and we've learned in a number of different studies, I cite one of them here, that the humanities and social sciences open access journals are particularly susceptible to disappearing, to vanishing. And so part of our mandate, as we interpret it, is to help journals, especially in our academic HSS context, to kind of find ways not only to publish materials as a first stop, but also to archive and to point to those external sources as a way of promoting their discoverability and helping with preservation. So just quickly in my remaining time, I'm going to show you kind of how we are using PIDs currently. So there's an auto-populate tool we can use within profiles for researchers. You can display your ORCID profile and connect it to your Commons account. But you can also pull in your profile data from ORCID, just as a way of saving a bit of time if you have a really well-developed profile on ORCID. And we've also developed a publications import tool. So here you can see the button you would press to kind of bring your ORCID publications into your HSS Commons account to push those into our repository. And so on the next screen, I'll show you just quickly what it looks like when you press that button that I've circled in red here. So there's a kind of warning about, review your data because the metadata pulled in from ORCID isn't always in the format you want. You always want to be careful that it's recognizing the authors properly. But you can also see kind of in the list below that it highlights any publications that have been previously imported, and that's to help with something that others have highlighted, that potential duplication of publications across different repositories or systems. So we're still developing this and improving it, but we're pretty happy with how it's been used already. We use DOIs for publications in the repository. And just briefly to wrap up our future plans for using PIDs, we're hoping to make that syncing with ORCID bidirectional. We're hoping to add additional PIDs, including RORs. They're not yet included, but that's really important to us, as are DOIs for grants. And we're also looking alongside our Australian research partners, we're looking into research activity identifiers, or RAIDs, for projects. That's something that they've identified it as a priority PID. And then finally, looking at syncing and integration with something called the Canadian CV to help researchers populate their official kind of national record profile and publications more easily to help with that data management piece. And I'll just close by saying thanks again to John and others at ORCID CA for their support, and I'm not going to read this quotation, but basically it takes a lot of work to implement PIDs effectively, a lot of resources, collaboration, etc. And so we're really excited about the conversations like this that are happening to move that forward. And I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Graham. Okay, James and Zach from American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS, you are up.
Great, I'll start. Then I'll turn it over to Zach. So I'm James Schulman. I'm Vice President at ACLS. I just want to frame what we're doing and what we're really setting out to do, because we're not as far along as either of the other presenters. But worth saying that American Council of Learned Society does a couple of very different things. And ORCID is part of our plans in our various modes of activity. So obviously our name comes from working with 81 academic associations in the humanities and social sciences, some of whom, like MLA, as you saw earlier, are already using ORCID, many of whom are not. So we hope to do things with them in the future. Obviously, it's a bit of a barrier that smaller organizations, Society for Dance History, can't really afford to be members on their own. That's something we've talked with ORCID about, and we hope to help on in the future. But we also are widely known as a fellowship and regranting organization. And Zach can talk about how we're looking to use ORCID in that set of activities. And we have something like 14 or 15 active fellowship programs. So all of these are, for us, ORCID is a key part in the ways that other panelists have described, giving credit where credit is due, and whether that's for publications, whether it's for grants, whether it's associating a fellowship with a publication, whether it's a project that doesn't fit into the normal array of credit. All those things are the hidden labor of humanists, particularly, is something that we hope to use interoperable and reusable and machine readable capacities to enhance the profile of humanities on their campuses and get them credit for the various things they do. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach, who can talk about our specific hopes.
Thanks, James. And I just want to verify that everyone can see the presentation that I'm sharing.
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Schuster. I am the CRM specialist for ACLS. So while I've worked in data science and helped maintain databases for years, this has been my first kind of foray into the world of PIDs, DOIs, and metadata. So with that, I've been working with James to lead the ACLS adoption of ORCID and PIDs within our work. And like James mentioned, we're still in the very early stages of the process. Seeing Graham and Scott's presentations, I'm very excited by what we may be able to achieve in the future. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of our hopes with this initiative, plans we have in place, and some future aspirations. So with PIDs at ACLS, most of our current plans and projects are going to involve using the ORCID API. It's going to be a lot of custom integrations with the API with our existing platforms. So with this, we hope to begin writing information to both our prior awardees, ORCID IDs, along with our future awardees. We hope to have something in place that will allow people to authorize us to publish information on their behalf. We also hope to, in the future, be able to publish information for our reviewers. So anyone that's doing that peer review work for our programs, just to be able to give them that distinction and recognition that they deserve. And then also we've had some recent discussions surrounding publications and other works that come as a result of our funding. So the benefits for this, we believe that the use of PIDs and linking our existing work to the infrastructure of ORCID and ROR will help ensure that researchers and reviewers we interact with be given verifiable recognition that will be findable and accessible for future use and reference. This will also provide a new venue for ACLS to maintain our relationships with our awardees and for our work to be easily identified. And lastly, this will also formalize how our ACLS funding is seen on ORCID and then also throughout the internet. Moving forward with our plans, so workflows, we do plan to roll out our first initiative relatively shortly. With this, we'll be reaching out to a small volume of our prior awardees who we have luckily already sourced ORCID IDs from for a large number of these people. With this, we'll provide them with information relating to ORCID, why we're using it, what the benefit would be for a researcher, and also providing them with a link to authorize ACLS to post our funding information on their record. So we'll be using the API for that. When we've done this first initiative, I'm hoping that we'll be able to learn anything we need to learn. We'll regroup, and then hopefully from there we can expand to further years back and newer programs and really just try and hit all of those older awardees to be able to give everyone that recognition that they deserve for the funding that they've received. While we're working on that, we'll also be building out the tools with the ORCID API for our in-house application portal. With that, the plan is to start obtaining the OAuth authorization tokens when people apply to our programs. So if they were to receive that funding, we're able to go in afterwards and publish this without needing to reach back out and have that whole correspondence. And also in the future, we hope to utilize that same functionality to also pull information from ORCID IDs into our application portal. So education, employment history, anything else that might be in ORCID, this would allow them, our applicants, to pull that information and alleviate some of the work of that manual form filling. The last thing that we're hoping to do, or maybe not the last thing, but the last thing that I put on here, we're hoping to use ROR to standardize our internal database of organizations and also use that ROR plugin to hopefully assist with connecting our funding to its corresponding publications and outputs, just to get a little bit more of that information out there for any publications that may be created as a result of the work that our researchers are doing. Finally, I wanted to take a moment to discuss the process of introducing ORCID to our colleagues and working to integrate ORCID into our work. So the nature of the work that we do at ACLS is to help break down barriers and ensure that researchers around the world are able to apply to our programs. And with that, that led to discussions surrounding whether or not we would require ORCID IDs for applicants for various programs. And what that may mean for some of our international applicants or anyone that may have any issues with the application process or just have those barriers using the site. So this is still an ongoing discussion on how best to handle this, what the requirements may need to be, and it's something that we're still looking for an adequate solution on. Additionally, as ORCID and PIDs are not widely adopted within the world of the humanities, or at least not in the work that we've done so far, we have had the exciting challenge of educating our team and those we interact with, namely our societies, on the benefits of this work and how it can assist them in the future. Some future plans as far as that would be, one, more correspondence to our awardees or people that we work with on ORCID and PIDs in general, and also building out our website with some more references for anyone that may have questions. That's everything that I had. James, did you have anything else?
No, that's great. Happy to answer questions during this session or later.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, James and Zach. So that brings us to some time for questions and answers. I'm making it so that people can, yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself if you would like to. And turn your video on if you'd like to. There were a few questions in the chat as we were going.
Yeah, and I can take over from here, Sheila, if you want. Yeah, I'll be running the question and answer period today. So, yeah, as Sheila mentioned, there are a couple questions in the chat, so we can go ahead and address those now. But if you have any other questions about the presentation or for our presenters, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you. We don't really have that much time, so please feel free also to send any questions that you have or that might occur to you later to us. I think one of us can just put our emails for CRCan and Lyrasis in the chat. And so if you have a question now, we can't get to it, or if you have a question later, please send it our way and we can answer it ourselves or send it on to our fantastic presenters today. All right, so to go back to the questions here in the chat. So the first question from Amanda says, are they being used with music, audio publishing, scores, film, images, or audio? They was ORCID. Okay, great. Thanks, Amanda. I was going to ask. Yeah. So did someone want to answer that, or?
I can jump in. So okay, so
Okay,
I thought you were
thanks.
talking about DOIs, actually, not
Yeah,
ORCID. So
same.
I guess I have two answers here. The first has to do with the actual output. Yes, DOIs are being assigned to these things. I was spending some time throughout this presentation looking for examples from within at least DataCite Canada specifically, because that's a sort of the data set of all of the DOIs that are registered in Canada. We can sort through, and I just wanted to share this one. It's not a film, but it is sort of an audiovisual presentation that has a DOI assigned to it. And the DataCite metadata schema, which I can speak to better than the Crossref metadata schema, has a resource type for audiovisual, and which may or may not include sound, and also has a separate resource type for sound. And there's everything from data sets that relate to like animal recordings in sort of natural databases of sort of sounds and stuff in the world, all the way to these kinds of like presentations. So I wanted to flag that for the outputs. As for ORCID itself, this is where that link to that article from, I believe, maybe it was July, and there was a call for the community to comment on ORCID improving its work types. That is exactly what this is going to be for. Right now, the work types representing specifically arts, I should say, outputs are not super well represented, but that's what this project is for. ORCID is looking to expand their work type vocabulary, and the specific reason is to ensure that this is represented. There is a whole section for musical scores, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that's being added, and there are a variety of other ways that these kinds of outputs are being reflected in or will be reflected in whatever updated metadata schema comes out. I'm not sure of the timeline on that, but yeah, thank you for sharing that link.
Perfect. Thanks, John. And yeah, we also have another question here from Sadie. It's a very long question. Essentially, I think you've been able to take a read through it, John. I'm wondering if you might want to answer this one as well. But
Yeah,
essentially,
sorry.
the end of the question is, do you see a strong benefit to DOIs and ARCs over handles?
So this is something that we've been specifically tackling in Canada as we build our national PID strategy. We've been asked these questions, and so it's something we want to address. And one of the things that I think is really worth thinking about when it comes to persistent identifiers is that there are different ways of imagining what they're for. In some cases, we imagine that they are only for resolving. We want to make sure that the link goes somewhere and points to the right thing. It's for author disambiguation. It's for finding the right publication. But that's not the only actual benefit of PIDs. Making sure that there's a permalink is important, but it's not the only thing. It's also about connecting PIDs together and about ensuring the interoperability of the metadata associated with each PID. So when we talk about things like writing information to ORCID, publishers have their metadata that they've attached to the DOI, and they push that metadata, including the DOI, into ORCID. So an ORCID ID points to a list of DOIs, and the DOI points to a series of ORCID IDs or a series of research organization registry identifiers. And it doesn't just do this literally so you can click on it. It does it in a way that enables the machines to speak to each other and pass that information along automatically. Handles are extremely simplified versions of DOIs. DOIs are built on top of handles as a technology. So handles do the work you need them to do in your repository when it comes to just having a permanent link. That's great. You always get to that landing page. They don't do the work that DOIs do around the relationships to other parts of the PID ecosystem, actually enabling API transfers back and forth, metadata, sort of communication across systems, pointing to other PIDs. They don't do that. So handles are a PID in the sense of it identifies something, but it's not a PID in the sense that we care about interoperability. So that's the main reason why we talk about the value of DOIs over these other things. That being said, there are so many different use cases out there. I want to specifically speak to the ARC use case. I'm sorry to be taking up so much oxygen. I'll be very brief with this. Archival resource keys are a really valuable tool when it comes to, in particular, the way we're using it at CRKN is for digital heritage objects. There are a total of about 65 million DOIs that have been registered with DataCite and maybe 120, 140 million with Crossref. Maybe it's 160 million. So there are like 250 million DOIs total across these two organizations we care about in Canada and the US. We have 65 million objects alone in our digital heritage database. DOIs are not the right use case for this at the object level. So we use ARCs to have a permalink to each individual heritage item. That doesn't preclude the idea of a collection level DOI or other ways of connecting things together. Also, we don't need ORCID when it comes to most of these particular kinds of heritage objects because it's all people who have died, which is not the ORCID use case. So we maybe use ISNI or ARC again for sort of dead cultural or dead people. So there are different use cases at different domains. I think this is a really important question. We're always asked why DOIs, why not ARCs, why handles? That's why.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, John. That's a great answer. It's perfect. We have a couple more questions here, but we are pretty much at time for today. So we will copy these questions from the chat. Or please feel free to send us these questions at the email address that Sheila, I believe, put into the chat. And we will get back to you on these questions. So with that, I'm concluding our community call for today. And I wanted to thank everyone for being here. And I really wanted to say a special thank you to our presenters who gave really excellent insight into their work that they do and PIDs in humanities, arts, and social sciences, which is an incredibly important topic. So big thank you to everyone for being here today, and a special thank you to our presenters, and I hope you all have a really excellent day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.